Hi, folks. This is Dr. G, and this is the first of two lessons that I'm recording for week one. So you'll see on Lalima that I already recorded a greetings video, so you're welcome to look at that. But for this lesson, I'm going to be talking about what you've read in the introduction to our media ethics textbook, and this is really just about the basic philosophical foundations that we'll be working with this semester for media ethics. So I'm going to get right into it and try to keep this stuff relatively quick. Um, so let me share my screen with you. And pull up PowerPoint for the week one lessons. So I'm going to cover the book on here. And as I've said, in the greetings video, and on the syllabus, I'm going to be providing a mix of materials. So although we'll be relying to a large degree on the media ethics textbook, I'm also going to be bringing in other materials as well. So in this case, I'm really relying on the textbook and just kind of covering that. And in fact, with lesson number 2 for week one, I'm going to be relying on the textbook. But for future presentations, if I do them, and I'm not sure yet if I'm going to keep making these videos, I'll think about it. But if I do them, I'll be covering other things other than just the textbook. So anyway, let me dive in here. Okay, so the basic idea here is, like it says, to recognize the need for professional ethics in journalism and strategic communication work through a model of ethical decision making and identify and use philosophical principles applicable to professional practice. So the next slide says, um, actually, let me just skip ahead to, well, the next slide says the dilemma of dilemmas. Resolving dilemmas is the business of ethics. You need tools for this. The idea is to give you tools, not answers to ethical questions. You've got to find your own answers, and because that's what this is really about. And it's more than just a set of rules. In other words, more than just a set of do's and don'ts. So we're going to be working on developing the skills, the analytical models, the vocabulary, kind of just the understanding of the concepts and how you feel comfortable applying them in order to work your way through ethical decisions. The third slide shows that there's a difference between ethics and morals, right? And that ethics is, um, well, let's start with morals. Morals is maybe your religious beliefs, maybe it's what you feel, it's your ideas of right and wrong. Okay, it's maybe your impulses towards them or the things that you believe in terms of your religious faith, that leads you to judgments about right and wrong. Ethics is a different. Ethics is really almost more about the process. What it's how it's fundamentally different is the idea of ethics is that this is grounded in reasoning, so in rationality. So there's a rational process to arrive at your ethical decisions, and it's grounded in evidence. So it has a purchase in the real world. Is a term I think we'll keep coming back to. But I kind of skipped through these first 3 slides quickly because um, of a broader point I want to make about them, which is that when which has to do with the rationale or the whole point of the course, which is that I know from my own experience as a reporter, and I'm sure you all are going to find out that when you are out on the job as a journalist, or if you're working back in the newsroom as a journalist, you are confronted with serious, difficult ethical questions all the time. And it's not your job to be an ethicist. It's your job to meet deadlines and get the work done. And as you all know, because I think everybody in this class is a 400 level class, already has some experience with reporting and putting together stories, you've already got your hands full. And when I say hands, I mean intellectually, your brain is already very, very busy figuring out all the things that you need to figure out just to get your job done. done, right? Just to meet your deadline, just to work your way through the story, just to put the story together, just to understand what the story is about and pursue it. Okay. So when at the same time you are confronted with questions about the right and the wrong way to approach something, whether that's, I mean, just to give a simplest example, you know, and this can happen every day. This maybe does happen every day to you on some level or another, but you get into contact with a source, and the source is reluctant to talk, and you're questioning, to what degree can I um, kind of win this person over, like charm this person over, in some situations where you know, the interview or the information from the person that you're talking to, your source, is really, really crucial to the story, and it's your job to get the story done. There's a lot of pressure to deal with that person, to sort of say, "Oh, no, it's not gonna be a negative story, it's gonna be a positive story, you're really gonna like it," or here's how I'm going to write it, and you package that in a way that sounds appealing to your source from whatever perspective they're coming from. And you may even be doing this kind of thing as you're speaking to someone, um, without even really thinking about it. Like, you're just trying to get through the conversation. You're trying to get what you need to get so you can get on to the next interview or the next part of your reporting, right? But right there, you're confronted with a really difficult decision about where are the boundaries, what's really, you know, first of all, what's really appropriate in terms of how I say this stuff to somebody, and second of all, what's really ideal. And I just threw that out as one example because it's so every day. It's the kind of thing that you deal with all the time. If you're a police reporter, as I was for years, what kind of relationship do you build with the cops who are naturally sort of suspicious and hostile to the press in order to get them to trust you, so that you can regularly get the information you need, to say report it for a daily newspaper. And that relationship you develop with them can, you know, can come down very differently between, you know, depending on the ethical decisions you make about how to handle that relationship. Um, so the thing is, you're confronted with difficult ethical questions, big and small, all the time as a reporter. And one of the things I would say, and you could say I'm biased because I was a reporter for a decade and now I've been a media scholar, like I got my PhD and I've been a professor for 15 years. So I've actually now at this point been a scholar more than I was a journalist working in the field, but I've done both jobs for, you know, 10 years at least. Um, is that in my opinion, and I think you might hear this from other people who are scholars or who are kind of outside, you know, being just straight up journalists. Journalists are terrible philosophers. It's not their job to be philosophers. There's nothing other than maybe the schools that you may go to for your journalism degree that require this ethics course. There's nothing really in their education or training that requires them to know much of anything about philosophy. And that would be fine, except that a lot of what the decisions you're making every day have a have their footing or have their a foundation in philosophical thinking. So, like when you call up objectivity and say, "Oh, I'm going to be an objective reporter," there's the questions of what those mean, but really in order to understand what you're saying when you say I'm being objective, you have to understand enough about what we call epistemology, in other words, the study of knowledge, like what's knowable, how we know it, how confident we can be about what we know and what we think we know, etc. You have to have sorted that out in a way that's sound and clear, or you're just not a good philosopher, right? Like, and that doesn't mean every philosopher is right in every conclusion they come to, but that the really the test of good philosophy is, do they understand, you know, relevant philosophical concepts uh, clearly, and are they making sound decisions based on those understandings of philosophical concepts? And um, as journalists, we're not really trained to do this. We're not philosophers, we're journalists. We have a job to do when we go out and report stories. And so um, it's like we're treading into really deep philosophical waters. Like objectivity is a really complex issue on a philosophical level, but we're doing it without necessarily the grounding or the training or the understanding of ethics that we often need. So the whole rationale of this class, and frankly of these first three slides, is the idea that um, you really need to develop some knowledge and some clarity about some basic philosophical concepts. I mean, what we introduce you to in week one, and that's kind of really the main time when we cover a lot of the basic philosophy. I mean, I'll introduce a bit more of it over the next couple weeks, but what we cover in that is really just meant to be a start. I'm not giving you the canon, and the textbook is not giving you the canon of philosophy and of ethics for this course. It's just, you're dipping your toe in the water with these philosophical ideas. And by the way, I should sort of explain why this is important. So I've said, okay, you're dealing with ethical decisions all the time. You're dealing with questions that are founded in philosophical concepts all the time, like what are my professional standards for how I'm doing my job right? Is it objectivity? And if it's objectivity, what does it mean? And what are the implications of that? Like these are all things that you need some clarity about philosophy, as I've been saying, to understand. Uh, why is it important, though? It's important because if you don't understand these philosophical ideas, right, and if you're just waking up every day and you've got your plates full with everything you've got to get done as a reporter, you're making your ethical decisions ad hoc. And I can tell you from experience, because I did not have, I only studied media after my 10 years as a reporter. I didn't have that preparation from journalism school going into being a reporter. I can tell you from experience that you make decisions ad hoc, and it is very difficult to remain consistent. And if people call you on choices you made, without a lot of work in this area of ethics, you may find yourself making up answers off the top of your head that if you were asked the same question about the same situation or a different situation a week later, you might end up giving a completely different answer. You don't want to do that. I mean, I would say with ethics, it's impossible to just come up with simple, clear rules of right and wrong. The classic example is thou shalt not kill. Well, what if it had been, 1935 or 36 or something, and you'd had the opportunity to kill Hitler? Would that have been wrong to do? So any ethical rule you can come up with, you can think of an exception where it would be wrong. And so I think it's maybe setting too high a bar for yourself to say, well, I'm going to come up with this clear set of guidelines for myself and clear set of rationales, and I'm never going to vary from them. On the other hand, if you don't have some clarity about what you believe and why you believe it, um, you're going to be completely inconsistent, and you're going to violate your own beliefs, or you're just kind of not going to have any strong ones um, until you kind of sort a lot of these issues out. And I don't think you can sort them all out in this one class. You need the real world experience. So this is the beginning of a process for you. But the main thing I hope you take away from the class is maybe what I just explained in the last few minutes, which is the idea that you want some clarity about the big conceptual stuff that you're wrestling with every day. And you ultimately want to develop as much consistency and depth of understanding and groundedness or soundness in your ideas as you can, so that if you do get challenged, your answers are consistent and they're thoughtful and they're clear and they're sound. Okay. So let me keep going from here. Okay. So what this slide is explaining is ethics as a discipline, ethics as a philosophy, and what that encompasses. Um, and I guess what I would add to just what you're seeing on the screen, on the text on the screen here, is that um, as you know, obviously these a lot of the philosophical ideas, or not a lot, but a significant portion of the philosophical ideas of ethics go back to Plato, well, to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They get that in the right order. So to the ancient Greeks, thousands of years ago. Um, and they go right, the study of ethics and philosophy goes right up to today. Obviously, you have contemporary or modern philosophers that are still weighing in on these issues. And, you know, of course, many of the concepts that the Greeks developed thousands of years ago are every bit as relevant as some of the or the best of the ethical ideas that are being developed over the last 100 years or the last 5 or 10 years. And I approach this, I've understood all this through being a historian, a media historian. And so that's required me to become very well acquainted with a lot of the philosophies that we're covering in this course. But it's also required me to understand those ideas as they were introduced or as they were embraced by societies in different eras. And when conditions changed in different eras, you get into a sort of a chicken or egg question of which was it first? Are the philosophical ideas that you're hearing being expressed in that era a reflection of the conditions and what was going on at the time, or are the ideas driving the history to some degree? In other words, when some of the leading voices in a society are introducing ideas for the first time, and they're pushing not just maybe our technology, but also our way of looking at the universe in a certain direction, and that's shifting, is that sort of driving then what we're seeing happening in history? So to give you an example, one of the things that I'll talk about quite a bit more in week 3, when we really focus on objectivity exclusively as a topic, is what happened during World War One, when in essence, that whole Western civilization, Western society that had developed up until that point kind of went up in the great conflagration that was the First World War. It was an incredible catastrophe that was not just a tragedy in terms of the massive number of people that were killed and the awesome and terrifying power of the technology that was developed and used for warfare at that time. But it also put to the bonfire a lot of the beliefs and the ideas that people had. And so the development of journalistic objectivity, in other words, the time when you've really first started hearing people in the media industry using the word objectivity and arguing about objectivity, was in the 1920s, right after the First World War. And what had happened was, you can see the second bullet point that says epistemology on here. What had happened was, there had the war itself, the catastrophe of the war, had forced people around the world to question even what they believed about, not only question what they know, but question what they think they know, or even all of their ideas that they had around knowing itself. So what is knowable? What do I really know? With what confidence do I know it? When I say I know something, what does that even really mean? Like, how, can you prove something to the ultimate, beyond any kind of shadow of a doubt? Or is doubt built into the universe, into the system of the universe? So questions about epistemology, basic questions about knowing, went through a dramatic shift. And we can point to the philosophers of the time and we can say, oh well, it was the pragmatists that came up with this, or it was some other group. We could talk about another philosophical movement of the time. But is it really, is it actually, is it the other way around? Is it that the events of society were forcing everybody at that time to question, to kind of reevaluate their ideas about epistemology, even if they didn't use fancy words or the word epistemology for explaining it. Even maybe everybody on the street, there was kind of a collective shift in the way people were looking at the universe, right? I mean, you think about, 200 or 300 years before that, what did people believe about witches? It's that kind of thing. We may look back and say the way they looked at things back then was crazy, or they were just ignorant. But they only knew what they knew at that time. And so all I'm saying is that it's important also, when you hear a lot of these ideas, to understand that there's a very real world historical context to what they believe. And so we may describe them in this chapter as just abstract ideas, but they're very much tied to things that were going on in the real world at the time when these ideas were introduced. And that includes going all the way back to the Greeks. Um, okay, so one of the things we can say about that evolution is that over time, particularly, well, I mean, I think you had kind of the two major movements in this, which was the sort of the ancient Greeks, and then the Enlightenment. And I'm sure if you've learned anything about the Enlightenment in school before, then you've learned that a lot of, they call it the Renaissance era for a reason, which is that they were bringing back a lot of the ideas of the Greeks at the time, which was in the pretty much the 1700s or the 18th century in Europe, and of course in America too, with the Revolution. And so both of those eras, both the Greek era and the Enlightenment era, were very much grounded in this idea of reason and rationality. And that's really at the core of the study of ethics. Okay, so this is now, Cicely Bach was the author of this book, Lying. She's actually a psychologist, but the authors of our textbook, Lee Wilkins and Chad Painter, and some of these other media ethics scholars as well, find Cicely Bach particularly useful or helpful in terms of sketching out some basic ideas about ethics. So just to go over these really quickly, what she's saying is, here's kind of a process, a thought process you can go through about figuring out where you stand ethically on a given issue. One, take a temperature check of yourself. Say to yourself, well, what do I think? As just an initial step, what do I think? What do I believe here? Where am I kind of in my gut feeling like I should go with this choice? Second, after you've kind of gotten some internal check on yourself to know what you're thinking or what you're feeling about it, reach out and hear from people about other ways of looking at it. Okay. Are there different ways of looking about it? What haven't I thought of? How do they think I should think this through? Right. And third, if possible, talk to the people who will be affected by the outcome of this. And we'll talk in a little while about what is it called, the veil of ignorance, where everybody kind of comes out and talks about the issue, and you don't know what their actual roles are in the decision that's going to be made. You're just hearing these different points of view, and so that's kind of what I think this is suggesting here. Have a public discussion where you find out how everybody is going to be affected. The difference, I think, with the veil of ignorance is everybody just speaks as a person. They may have all these different roles in it, but you don't know that when they have this kind of veil of ignorance conversation. But we'll get to that down the line a little bit. Okay, and so that's to move from Cicely Bach to the beginnings of some of the basic philosophical ideas. So she's kind of giving a roadmap for how to think through ethical decisions. When we shift now to what's on this slide, which is Aristotle, we're getting into the first of these kind of philosophical approaches to the question of ethics. And we start with the idea of Aristotle and the golden mean, right? And I think one of the things that's significant about Aristotle among the Greeks is that he was really the first who was specifically interested in grounding philosophical ideas to reality, to tying the two together, and to making, from the ground up decision making. But where the idea that we're being introduced here is just the idea of the golden mean. Okay. So I wanted to give you a little bit of context about Aristotle in that sense, but the golden mean is the idea that, like, if we have, that we can come up with a set of what we consider noble traits or virtuous traits or whatever, right? But whatever traits we come up with for someone we would want to look up to as a virtuous person, there's this question of, there's always going to be, he's saying, in every one of these situations, a spectrum of behavior, right? And so on the, any given behavior, like say courage, is on one level in excess just foolhardiness, and on the other level, I mean, on the other extreme is cowardice. So courage is actually a mean in between the two extremes in this character trait, right? And so you could see that with these three examples. So that's the idea of the golden mean. Um, and then these are just kind of a summary of some of the other ones. So um, Confucius's idea of self-cultivation is just, maybe it's, I think it's a fair generalization to say that a lot of Eastern philosophy or Eastern spirituality involves looking within and developing an internal discipline. And that at least is very true with what we have here for Confucius is self-cultivation, which is through self-cultivation, through taking a hard look at yourself and hard work on yourself, um, you can you can absorb and transform yourself in terms of the values of those around you. So you can, it says internalizing the social values through accumulative learning and repeated practices. So it's not entirely saying that you're an island and you're off doing this on your own. It's saying that you take in and you integrate, you internalize social values, and then strengthen yourself by working on yourself. Okay. Kant's idea is this idea of the categorical imperative, which is, just essentially the idea of whatever decisions you're making, keep in mind that you're looking for principles. You're looking for things that will ultimately have some universality or some, applicability to many different situations. It's a principle. It's not just making a decision ad hoc based on what you're confronting. Um, and then utilitarianism is simply the idea of, um, they use the word happiness. That is, I think, a bit confusing. I prefer, when I think about it, and I may just disagree, like this may be a philosophical debate that I would have to have with some of the basic utilitarians like Jeremy Bentham or Mill. But they're saying seek the greatest happiness for the greatest number. I might say seek the greatest well-being for the greatest number. Why it's important to use the term happiness versus something like well-being, I think is something that you can only answer if you get uh, deeper than we probably will be able to get this term in terms of the philosophy. But if anyone can give an answer to why happiness is really the word they land on and not say, for example, well-being, I'd be interested in knowing it, because as much as I've read about the different philosophers who are the utilitarians, I've never really understood why happiness is you know has to be kind of the word we use for that. But anyway, Um, so this is kind of a chart, just showing these different principled ideas. And so it's kind of a cheat sheet, I guess, for you. And then I think it's his two last ones, which is feminist theory and W.D. Ross's pluralistic theory of value. So this is interesting because what Ross is arguing is that we live in being living in the real world. We never get to just make one decision about one case. That it's all that real ethics is about different choices competing against each other and having to kind of figure out which takes precedence or which is which do you end up putting more importance on than another. Okay. um, and in sort of fleshing this out a little bit, he defines certain things. For example, he says right is the actual action that you end up taking, right? And the good, so that's the right. It's the action that you take, right? And the good is an objective, if indefinable, quality present in all acts. Okay. Um, so the example, and then there's two other ones, and I'll give you the example. So the two other ones are prima facie duties, which is what seemed to be right because of the nature of the act itself, and duty proper, which is those duties that are paramount given the specific circumstances. Okay. Um, so the example they give in the book is you are a reporter and you have a meeting with the mayor, but on the way there, you pass by a car accident and there's some child there that's in distress and needs to get immediate attention, right? So you have an appointment with the mayor, which is your job duty. So in that sense, it's a clear duty. But as a human being, you understand that, wow, there's an accident, there's this kid that needs help. That immediately is going to demand your attention. So the right in that situation, I would think applies to like what you do to help to give aid to that kid. The good is that you realize, maybe going back to the utilitarian concept, that there's the question of what's the greater, again, they say happiness, I might say well-being in this situation, right? That the greater good is when you pass somebody who is like needs medical attention at the side of the road because of a car accident, you absolutely stop. It doesn't matter what who you're supposed to meet for your job that you're on your way to. You have a moral duty to stop and deal with that, right? And then how does prima facie duties, as a term apply to that situation? Well, your prima facie duties in this situation would be to give aid to the kid, right? Um, and duty proper, that almost sounds like it could be, well, I got to go run to the mayor because that's my duty proper, right? But they're saying duty proper are those duties that are paramount given the specific circumstances. So since aiding the kid is paramount, I would say your duty proper in that situation is also a matter of giving aid to the kid. Um, and then um, the final kind of philosophical paradigm that we have here is feminist theory. And I think that, the way that I find this easiest to understand being a historian is one of the differences between the way that we approach things and other scholars approach things is historians look at mountains of historical evidence and then develop ideas about what they think happened in history. So we put the actual data and the real world stuff that we can gather, the evidence that we can gather ahead of the concepts. We develop the concepts out of the facts that we see in front of us, right? Which is to some degree what you all are doing as journalists, although you've all had me or other journalism professors say to you all, okay, what's your story idea? When you haven't gotten very far into the reporting. Now, I think just about all of you have also had the experience. We said, okay, I'm listening to your idea, and it's clear to me that you haven't done any reporting here. So you've just got some abstract idea of what you think you have a story about. Go out and do some reporting so that you know what it's actually really about, right? But in any case, it's not a linear process when you're doing that, right? There's a give and take because you are being asked, okay, what's your story idea? Like we are suggesting that. But then we're immediately saying, well, gather some information and then get back to us about your story idea because you're going to have a more informed opinion about it. Now, as you continue to report the story, your ideas about what this story about are going to continue to evolve, right? So it's not just it's not one or the other. It's not come up with a theory first and then pursue the data to back up that theory. And at the same time, it's not completely the reverse. It's not saying gather all the data and then tell me what the story idea is about, right? It's a a mixed process, okay? Um, and on the other hand, I would say like history or maybe feminist theory is more decidedly in the direction of you know, gathering information, gathering real world stuff, and then developing ideas directly out of those. Okay. So, in other words, it's not a thought experiment, right? It's not about coming up with some theory and then seeing how that plays out in real life. It is about developing it from the ground up. And that's why this study that's referenced in the textbook as an example is an example or is an important example. Carol Gilligan's abortion study from the late 70s, which she eventually put into her early 80s book, A Different Voice, and that is showing the way these women evolve as they deal with a pregnancy and with a question about abortion over time as they begin to confront the realities of the decision they're making. So, is that an entirely ground up approach or is that a mix? Um, I don't know, it's tough to say, but certainly the emphasis is on the idea that you develop your philosophical convictions based on the real world and on what you're confronted. Okay. Um, okay, so let's talk about this final slide. And basically, this slide is making an argument. It's saying essentially um, that in the past, when people have compared ethics to science, ethics hasn't come out very well. In other words, people have suggested that ethics is fuzzy, science is clear, science is about real knowledge and real understanding. Ethics is just a bunch of marshmallow stuff or cloudy stuff. Um, and so that's why it's saying that the vagaries of ethical choice is contrasted with the seeming certainty of scientific knowledge casts an unfair light on ethics. So what this slide is saying, and this is authored, I have to say, by the textbook authors, Wilkins and Painter. But what they're saying is that this is unfair, right? And here are the reasons why. Okay, so first of all, there's been a real evolution in science over the last 100 years, right? And this is called. Let me just pause the slideshow for a second to pull it up on the internet for you. So this is called. I think it's Kuhn's theory of scientific revolutions, right? This is from 1962, this book. Scientific development is not a steady process, but instead alternates between normal and revolutionary phrases. Now, notice it's referring to normal and revolutionary phrases. What this suggests when they say revolutionary phases, right, and his theory of scientific revolutions, is that um, that that you can have a scientific paradigm, right? Like a theory, okay? And to use the simplest one for this purposes, let's just use the theory of relativity, okay? Which is a whole theory of the universe, the laws of the universe, the way they work, right? And that's a paradigm, and that works or that exists up until the point when we get new information and new thinking about it, and the combination of new evidence and new thinking forces a shift, and that shift can be revolutionary. In other words, one paradigm, like the paradigm of the theory of relativity, can get completely replaced by an entirely different theoretical paradigm. In this case, in the case of physics, it was that new paradigm is called quantum mechanics. Okay, the theory of quantum mechanics that has to do with the nature of subatomic particles and kind of, in a sense, it has to do with like what we know and where we know it. Like the idea that a particle can be, or an atom can be in one place and it might be in another place, and we only have a theory that it's one place and not another place. I'm not going to get in the weeds of that, but the point is, when you have one paradigm replace another paradigm, it upsets the whole apple cart. Everything that we thought we knew before is now, we see it differently, or maybe we realize it wasn't right. Maybe everything that we thought we knew before now appears to us upside down, because our entire context of understanding what we thought we knew has changed. That is Kuhn's theory of scientific revolutions. Like, we have a theory, like a theory of relativity, and that operates, and we function under what we think we know up until the point when that gets replaced by a new theory and the whole thing gets overturned, right? So in that sense, when they say here science has undergone vast changes in the past 100 years, the old idea that we had of what science is and what we know, that kind of epistemology of science, is what we call positivism. Okay, that was like, you prove something and then it's proven and we know it and it's like a fact and the truth is absolute. We have the scientific knowledge and it's proven, right? That that positivism, that epistemology of science, has undergone this major change with Kuhn's theory of scientific revolutions, where now we say, no, we're not so sure of anything anymore. We only have theories that we operate under and we gather evidence for, right up until the moment when that whole apple cart gets overturned and we replace it with a different theory, which gives us a completely different understanding. And maybe one day we get to the point where we absolutely know what we know, but that isn't today. And that's not the way we think about what we know, right? So on the one hand, science has undergone vast changes in the past 100 years, meaning that there's been this fundamental shift in scientific epistemology from, positivism to, this theory of scientific revolutions. Okay, new moral theory thinking has emerged, but in ethics, actually, such work tends to build on rather than radically alter the moral theory that has gone before. Okay, so in ethics, we don't so much have like somebody coming after Aristotle that completely upsets the apple cart of everything that we thought we knew when we had Aristotle's golden mean. Generally, the ideas that we have in ethics are cumulative, and we may have debates about different perspectives, but it's not like one comes in and upsets or overturns everything that we thought we knew in the other. I mean, at least to some degree. Okay, that's an argument. I think that, to some degree, when it comes to actually epistemology and the way that relates to this, you could argue otherwise. But there's certainly a clear point that, like, we need to understand this history, and that to a large extent we're just building on what came before. Okay. And then thinking about global ethics uncovers some striking areas of agreement. What this suggests when you say that is, if we have certain ideas, like say in the United States, and then we discover, like say about marriage, okay, and then we discover at some community, some culture that's pretty untouched by the rest of civilization, has these same beliefs, right? Say about marriage. That suggests that there are certain universal ideas that we have about ethics that are shared and that may go to like an absolute truth, like a knowable, truth beyond a shadow of a doubt, things about like what's right and what's wrong. Particularly if we take the utilitarian view of like, what are we thinking about in terms of what's for the greater good or the greater happiness, right? Like maybe there are certain things that across cultures we understand as basic ethical principles, that apply, and that are just true. Okay. And finally, Aristotle's writing, more than 2,000 years old, still has much to recommend it in the modern era. The same can be said of utilitarianism and the Kantian approach, both after 100 years of critical review. So these ideas are really enduring. We don't completely just replace them the way we kind of remember scientific theories that have been displaced, but we don't still hold to old ideas of like in science of like the way we think things operate. So all of these things suggest there's actually more certainty in ethics than there is in science, which is an interesting way of looking at it. So from this point, there's more continuity in thinking about ethics than in scientific thought. And also, it has the rigor, the systematic quality, and the relationship to reality that moderns too often characterize as the exclusive domain of scientific thinking. And that's all I'm going to say for this first lesson. So thank you for listening. And I'm going to move on to now a second lesson, which deals with really chapter 2 of our textbook.